In today's video, we're going to go through creating a vendor credit while also conducting the job costing that will reduce the cost for the vendor credit to the applicable job and/or contract. Today, we're starting off in the financial module within True, and for the most part, we can enter vendor credits in a variety of different areas of the system. So from the upper left-hand corner, we're obviously in the financial module here, and we're going to go to the credit memo section of the system. Today, we're going to be focusing on creating the vendor credit. I'm going to switch over to the vendor side of things, and then I'm going to use the plus icon to generate a new vendor credit. This screen is kind of the first step of the vendor credits. I'm just going to create an easy one for $500. Now, the RMA number is typically produced from our vendor. We want to give the ability to kind of set some identifying criteria outside of a true generated ID in the system. So oftentimes, the vendor is going to give us this number. I'm going to create a silly number here. The reason, oftentimes, we want to be able to look back and see why we received this vendor credits. I'm just going to do an easy double build for materials, whatever the case may be. Next step is going to be selecting continue, and True is going to present me with the full vendor credit screen. This is where we top to bottom, left to right, enter all of the criteria here for our vendor credit. Starting off at the very top here, we've got the vendor credit ID. These can also be modified within company preferences, but this is the ID that True is going to generate for every single record in the system. Starting off with the vendor, we're going to use the pencil icon, and we're going to look up a vendor here. I'm going to put it under ABC Building Materials, or ABC Buildings. Now, very important next two sections here, the available credits, the debit and the credit. So these are the ledger accounts that we're going to use to, either incorporate in our financials for True accounting, or when we send this vendor credit to, let's say, QuickBooks online or desktop, we want to make sure that when we create the journal entry for this vendor credit, it's hitting the accounts that are appropriate. So the debit side of the transaction, the debit side of what the subsequent journal entry would be, typically most of our folks are using accounts payable. Oftentimes, we do have some folks that have a vendor credit asset account. Right now, I'm going to use the accounts payable account. Now, the credit side of this journal entry. Now, this would be the expense account, cost of goods sold account, some type of materials account that we would use, that we want to reduce the dollar amount based on the credit amount here, reduce that ledger account accordingly. By default, True is using the uncategorized expenses account. Oftentimes, this would be more or less the materials or whatever the applicable account would be for this particular vendor credit. If we receive a bill from, let's say, C.R. Lawrence, and it's going to be a shower door materials ledger account that we would increase when we receive that bill. Well, when we get a vendor credit for that same vendor, it's very likely that we would want to reduce that same ledger account, and that would be the credit side of this particular entry. Now, the source document and jobber contract, two fields that aren't necessarily required in all instances. The source document, we allow users to select the vendor credit and apply it to a specific bill or specific source document. Not required, and for the most part, typically I actually don't advocate for setting a source document. We want True, when either we're paying bills out of True Accounting or we're paying bills out of QuickBooks, we want those systems to act accordingly when we go to pay those bills. We want True, or we want QuickBooks to identify which source document or which bill we are going to apply the vendor credit upon paying our vendor. So typically, I'm not going to advocate for setting this field. We put it in for some certain situations where folks want to utilize a credit in a specific situation for a specific bill. Additionally, the jobber contract. This is actually incredibly important. We want to make sure that when we get a vendor credit and it's applied or it's for a specific jobber contract for materials we may have been double billed for, we want to make sure that we conduct the job costing and we're applying this reduction in cost to the applicable jobber contracts. Let's go ahead and do that now using the pencil icon. I'm going to navigate to our contracts here. I'm going to use our Tropicana field contract, and that will basically ensure we started off the job costing part by selecting that jobber contract and applying this vendor credit accordingly. We can see the reason and the RMA number. That's what I applied in the first part of the screen. And we have an amount and balance. We haven't utilized this vendor credit yet. When we go to pay ABC Buildings in our next check run, It's at that junction where True will automatically allow us to apply this vendor credit and thus essentially short pay our vendor in that situation. We're not done yet. In the upper right-hand corner here, this is our job costing screen. If we go to a job or if we go to a contract and we go to that job costing section, this screen looks very similar to what we see in those particular areas of the system. Using the plus icon, we can now see that True is creating a job costing record here. When we're going to be applying it to our Tropicana field, we can see that job costing ID. We know that every single job costing record will in fact contain a unique True ID get generated in the system. We can see our date here as well. It's going to coincide with today's date based on the date that we're entering our vendor credit. The job costing date can be modified if necessary. We can see that this is an invoice job costing type. This is an actual cost that is being reduced by the tune of $500. Now I can add notes here and I can also jump right to the job or contract. Let's go ahead and do that now before we actually finalize our vendor credit, just so we can see the impacts of our job costing based on entering that vendor credit here. So under the job costing tab of our financials section of the Tropicana field contract, lo and behold, we can see our credit memo ID. We can see that reduction of $500. In other videos and some of our other training topics, we can talk about the cost codes and the contract items and how we need to apply these accordingly. For now, we just want to be able to enter a vendor credit in the system and apply it to our job or contract. And we can tell that this job has now been reduced to $4,400 of total cost. We've got an invoice cost up here of $4,900. We've got an invoice cost for our credit memo that's going to be reducing the actual cost to get us down to a total actual cost amount of $4,400. I'm going to use the back button here to go back to our vendor credits, and bam, there it is here. We have a balance of $500 due. At this junction, we've entered all of the applicable areas of this vendor credit. The debit and credit account, we've conducted the job costing, file, emails, and notes section. This is where we can actually upload a copy of the vendor credit that we received from the vendor if we so choose. I can go ahead and select done here, and I need to produce a journal entry or approve this record for sync to our QuickBooks desktop or QuickBooks Online iterations. I'm going to go ahead and simply create the journal entry just so we can see the repercussions of setting that accounts payable or that debit and credit account. So we can see here that we're going to have, if I were to produce an accounts payable report right now, under ABC Buildings, we would have a negative $500. We have a vendor credit available for this particular vendor. Most importantly, we are also reducing our materials account. So we're going to reduce the cost of this job, and we're also reducing the total dollar amount on our financial statements, specifically for our P&L, for this materials account. That's it for vendor credits. If you have any questions, please email us at support@constructtrue.com.